Is there or isn't there deeper cultural long-term hostility or mistrust which is being expressed in this situation? What is the underlying cultural reality here? I guess is what I'm trying to get to. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Glad you mentioned this because it is highly relevant. I think that is the case. I mean, some of the things you've mentioned are real, they're relevant, but we've already talked about the Slavophiles, right? We've already mentioned this question of Moscow, the Third Rome. Third Rome got mentioned by Fareed Zakaria the other day, but just a fleeting mention, very, very superficial, no explanation. What does it mean? We've gone through it, we'll be going through it again. And we've also talked about the Slavophiles in Russia in the early to middle 19th century, in particular after Napoleon and after the so-called Decembrist rebellion of elements of the Russian army in 1825. They didn't want Nicholas I. They wanted Constantine as the heir, and he was the legal heir, and they wanted a constitutional monarchy. But in the years after that, we begin to find a kind of literary school which is all based on expressing contempt, hatred, aggressivity towards the West. Maybe just one example in the short time that's available to us right now. One of these Slavophiles, or better yet, a representative of a version of this called official nationality. Official nationality is the time 1825 to 1855. In other words, Nicholas I, this was his doctrine of the state, not communism, but official nationality. His slogans were orthodoxy, meaning the religion, autocracy, and nationalism. And one of the ideologues of this school is a guy called Shevyrev, Shevyrev. And reading from one of the invaluable works of Nicholas Ryazanovsky, you can find online, he writes about this guy Shevyrev, and I want to get to the quote from Shevyrev, because that's the heart of the matter, but to set the stage. According to Ryazanovsky, the overwhelming might of Russia confronted a shattered, declining, and indeed dying West. Pogodin, this theoretician that I'm pointing your attention to, Pogodin, loved to draw general sketches of Western weakness and collapse as pendants, as counterparts to his enthusiastic depiction of the colossal power of Russia. Shevyrev especially tried to outdo his competition on the subject of the decline of the West. And here are a couple of lines from an article that Shevyrev wrote in an article in a magazine, the first issue. It's called The Muscovite. The Muscovite. So, quote from Shevyrev. Yes, in our sincere, friendly, and close relations with the West, we fail to notice sometimes that we are dealing, as it were, with a man who carries inside himself a vicious, contagious disease, who is surrounded by an aura of noxious exhalation. We exchange kisses, we exchange embraces with him, and we share with him the meal of thought, we drink from the cup of feeling, and we fail to notice the poison concealed in this carefree conversation. We do not scent anything in the joy of the feast. We do not smell the future corpse, which is already exuding an order. And the conclusion to this part is, he says, the duty of the philosopher is to, quote, strike the bell of contemporary history and to cry out again and again, Europe is dying. Europe is dying. Now, this Shevyrev, this is one of the most famous slogans of these Slavophiles, official nationality guys, and related groups. What we just heard about, you're talking to somebody from Western Europe, and it turns out that they're already dead and they're already rotting on the inside. This remarkable passage, writes the very well-informed Yazanovsky, this remarkable passage may have given rise to the expression of the putrid, or putrefying West. So the slogan of these Slavophiles is, you're dealing with a rotten, decadent, decaying West. But beyond that, it's putrid or putrefying. The Russian is the thesis Gnili Zapad or Gniyushem Zapad. So again, the putrid or putrefying. So this mentality is not new, and it's been there for a long time. Sometimes it's underground, sometimes it's pushed into the background, it's de-emphasized. But I'm afraid we seem to be dealing right now with one of the periodic flare-ups of this, and therefore you have to realize that you're dealing with something that is very deeply rooted and which has a broad appeal, and which we, I think, in the Western world have to be aware of. And I'm responding here, above all, to one of the Washington Post correspondents, a guy called Robert Costa, who appears in the evenings on MSNBC. He often shows up with Brian Williams at 11 o'clock. He says, Trump believes that Russia is part of the Western world. Russia is part of the West. Well, I'm sorry, but this is a very dubious, very questionable thesis. And don't take it from me. Take it from these Russians themselves. Now, this school that we're talking about, Pagodin and the Slavophiles and so forth, that's a rather extreme form. They're very, very blunt. They're very, very outspoken. But there is, in many cases, a kind of cultural undercurrent which is there. And again, sometimes it's more powerful, sometimes it's weak, sometimes it seems to disappear. It's certainly not that strong in the intellectuals of St. Petersburg and Moscow. No, I don't think you're going to find that as the main thing. But then when you go to other social circles, you're going to find that this is there. So I hope that we'll be able to bring people along to an understanding of this, right? Week by week, this question of the Slavophiles, the official nationality people, and indeed the back to the land movement, right? Back to the land, another important part. And that then gets you to Dostoevsky and some other names that people are much more familiar with.